The champagne glass slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor of my sister's pristine living room. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me, their expressions ranging from mild annoyance to outright disgust. The silence that followed felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it impossible to breathe. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Of course, my Aunt Margaret muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against her wine glass. Leave it to Seraphina to make a mess at such an important celebration. The laughter that rippled through the room wasn't kind. It was the sort of laughter that cuts deep, the kind that follows you home and keeps you awake at night. I dropped to my knees, frantically trying to gather the glass shards with my bare hands, feeling the familiar sting of tears threatening to spill over. This was supposed to be my sister Elena's day, her moment of joy as we celebrated the upcoming arrival of her first child. But somehow I had managed to turn it into another showcase of my failures. Growing up as the younger sister of Elena Castellanos was like living in the shadow of a blazing sun. She was everything I wasn't and everything everyone expected me to become. Valedictorian of her high school class, full scholarship to Harvard, law degree with honors, married to a successful surgeon, and now expecting their first child at the perfect age of 32. Meanwhile, at 28, I was still figuring out what I wanted to do with my life, bouncing between part-time jobs and feeling like a constant disappointment to everyone around me. The baby shower was held at Elena's stunning colonial-style home in the suburbs of Virginia, complete with perfectly manicured lawns and a white picket fence that seemed to mock my own chaotic existence. I had driven 3 hours from my tiny studio apartment in Baltimore, wearing the only dress I owned that didn't have stains or holes, hoping maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time I wouldn't be the family embarrassment. As I knelt on the floor, picking up pieces of broken glass, I could hear the whispered conversations resuming around me. My cousin Isabella was telling someone about her recent promotion to senior marketing director. My other cousin, Carmen, was discussing her husband's new dental practice. Everyone had something to celebrate, something to be proud of, some achievement that validated their existence. "Let me help you with that," came a gentle voice from beside me. I looked up to see Mrs. Rodriguez, Elena's elderly neighbor, crouching down with a paper towel in her hand. She was the only person who had moved to assist me, while everyone else continued their conversations as if nothing had happened. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The kindness in her eyes almost broke me completely. "Don't worry about it, mija," she said softly, helping me gather the remaining pieces. "Accidents happen to the best of us." But even her kindness couldn't erase the damage that had already been done. As I stood up, disposing of the glass in the nearby trash can, I caught sight of my reflection in the living room mirror. My dark hair was falling out of its hastily assembled ponytail, my dress was wrinkled from the drive, and my face was flushed with embarrassment. I looked exactly like what I was, a mess. Elena approached me with that patient smile she had perfected over the years, the one that said she loved me but wished I could get my act together. "Sarah, honey, maybe you should sit down and have some food. You look a little shaky." "I'm fine," I lied, though we both knew it wasn't true. I had barely eaten in 2 days, not because I couldn't afford food, but because anxiety had a way of making everything taste like cardboard. The baby shower continued around us with its carefully orchestrated activities. There was the guessing game about the baby's birth weight and length, the advice cards where everyone wrote pearls of wisdom for the new mother, and the gift opening ceremony where Elena graciously accepted beautifully wrapped presents that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I had brought a gift too, a handmade baby blanket that had taken me weeks to knit. I had chosen soft yellow yarn since Elena and her husband David were keeping the baby's gender a surprise, and I had poured hours of love and hope into every stitch. But sitting there watching Elena unwrap designer baby clothes and expensive strollers, my humble offering felt pathetic. When it was time for Elena to open my gift, I felt my stomach clench with nervous anticipation. She pulled away the tissue paper I had used instead of proper wrapping paper and held up the small yellow blanket. It looked impossibly tiny in her hands, and I noticed immediately that one corner was slightly uneven where I had dropped a stitch. "Oh, this is, sweet," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone people use when they're trying to be polite about something they don't particularly like. "Did you make this yourself?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Around the room, I could see people exchanging glances. Making something by hand wasn't seen as thoughtful in this crowd. It was seen as cheap, as a sign that you couldn't afford to buy something real. "I thought it would be more personal," I said weakly, as I watched Elena quickly move on to the next gift, setting my blanket aside without another word. My Aunt Margaret, who had never missed an opportunity to point out my shortcomings, chose that moment to strike again. "You know, Seraphina, when I was your age, I already had 2 children and a successful career. Maybe it's time you thought about what you're really going to do with your life instead of wasting time on these little hobbies." The word hobbies cut deep. Knitting wasn't a hobby for me. It was one of the few things that brought me peace, that made me feel like I was creating something beautiful in a world that seemed determined to remind me of my failures. "Margaret," my mother said in a warning tone, but the damage had already been done. The room had fallen silent again, everyone waiting to see how I would respond to yet another public humiliation.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"I'm working on figuring things out," I said, hating how defensive I sounded. "At 28, Isabella chimed in, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Most people have their lives sorted out by now. I mean, look at Elena. She's got everything together. Beautiful home, successful career, loving husband, and now a baby on the way. What do you have to show for your life?" The question hit me like a physical blow. What did I have to show for my life? A studio apartment with a leaky faucet, a job at a coffee shop that barely paid my bills, no romantic prospects, no clear career path, and apparently no respect from my own family. The answer was nothing. I had nothing to show for 28 years of existence. "That's enough," Elena said firmly, finally stepping in to defend me. But it was too late. The words had been spoken, and everyone in the room had heard them. More importantly, I heard them, and deep down, I knew they were true. I excused myself to go to the bathroom, needing a moment to compose myself before I completely fell apart in front of everyone. In the mirror above Elena's perfectly organized vanity, I stared at my reflection and tried to find something, anything, that would contradict what Isabella had said. But all I saw was a woman who had drifted through life without purpose, without achievement, without anything to make her family proud. The worst part was that this wasn't the first time I had found myself in this position. Family gatherings had become a series of interrogations about my life choices, thinly veiled as concern, but really serving as opportunities for everyone to feel better about their own lives by comparison. I was the cautionary tale, the example of what not to become. When I returned to the living room, the conversation had moved on to nursery themes and baby names, but I could feel the residual tension in the air. I found a corner chair and tried to make myself invisible for the remainder of the party, smiling politely when people looked my way and nodding at appropriate intervals during conversations I wasn't really part of. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself thinking about my childhood and how different things had been then. Elena and I had been close once, before the world started keeping score of our achievements and ranking our worth based on external success. We used to build blanket forts in our shared bedroom and whisper secrets late into the night. She used to tell me that we would always be best friends, that nothing would ever come between us. But somewhere along the way, life had driven a wedge between us. Not through any deliberate cruelty on Elena's part. She genuinely loved me and wanted the best for me. The problem was that her version of the best looked exactly like her life, and I seemed incapable of creating anything that resembled it. The gift opening continued, and I watched as Elena received beautiful handmade items from other guests. a gorgeous wooden rocking chair crafted by David's father, an intricate baby mobile made by her best friend who was an artist, a set of organic cotton onesies from a boutique that specialized in sustainable baby clothes. Each gift was presented with confidence and received with genuine enthusiasm. My yellow blanket sat forgotten in the corner, partially hidden under discarded wrapping paper. As the party began to wind down, people started saying their goodbyes and offering final congratulations to Elena and David. I helped clear plates and glasses, grateful for something to do with my hands, something that made me feel useful, even if it was just basic cleanup. "Sarah, wait," Elena called out as I headed toward the door with several other guests. "Can you stay a few minutes? I want to talk to you." My heart sank. The last thing I wanted was a private conversation about my life choices and future plans. I was emotionally drained and barely holding myself together as it was. After the last guest left, Elena and I sat in her living room while David retreated to his study, sensing that we needed privacy. The house felt different without the crowd, larger somehow, but also more intimate. The afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. "I'm sorry about what Isabella said," Elena began, her hands resting protectively over her growing belly. "She wasn't wrong, though," I replied, staring down at my hands. "I don't have anything to show for my life. I'm 28, and I'm still figuring out what I want to be when I grow up." Elena was quiet for a long moment, and I could feel her studying my face. When she spoke again, her voice was gentler than it had been all day. "Do you remember when we were kids and you used to say you wanted to help people? You were always the one rescuing injured birds and volunteering to help elderly neighbors with their groceries. You had such a big heart." "That was a long time ago," I said, though her words stirred something deep inside me that I had almost forgotten. "It doesn't have to be," she replied. "Sarah, I love you, and I know you're capable of amazing things, but you have to believe it first. You have to stop letting other people define your worth." It was good advice, the kind of wisdom that sounds profound in the moment but feels impossible to implement in real life. How do you stop caring what other people think when their opinions have shaped your self-image for so long? How do you find your own path when you're not even sure what direction you want to go? We talked for another hour, and Elena shared stories about her own struggles with self-doubt, though they seemed minor compared to my existential crisis. She had questioned her career choice, worried about being a good mother, felt overwhelmed by expectations, but she had never questioned her fundamental worth as a person the way I did. When I finally left Elena's house, driving back toward Baltimore as the sun set behind me, I felt emotionally wrung out, but also strangely hopeful. Maybe she was right. Maybe I could find my way if I stopped looking for validation from others and started listening to my own heart. The drive gave me time to think about what Elena had said about helping people. It was true that I had always been drawn to service, to making life better for others in small ways. Even now, working at the coffee shop, my favorite part of the job was the regular customers who shared their stories with me, who seemed to genuinely appreciate having someone listen to their troubles. But how could I turn that natural inclination into something meaningful, something that would make my family proud and give my life purpose? The answer came to me 3 weeks later in the most unexpected way. I was working the morning shift at Coastal Grounds, the coffee shop where I had been employed for the past 6 months, when a woman in a crisp uniform walked in. She was tall and confident, with short cropped hair and an air of authority that commanded immediate respect. The insignia on her uniform identified her as a member of the United States Coast Guard. "Good morning," she said with a warm smile. "Could I get a large coffee, black, and one of those blueberry muffins?" "Of course," I replied, preparing her order with the same care I gave to every customer. There was something about her presence that made me want to do my best work. As I handed her the coffee, she looked directly at me and said, "Thank you. I can tell you take pride in what you do." It was such a simple comment, but it caught me off guard. Most customers barely acknowledged my existence beyond placing their order. "I try to," I said, surprising myself with the honesty of my response. "That's good," she said. "Pride in your work, no matter what it is, shows character. I'm Commander Sarah Chen, by the way." Seraphina Castellanos, I replied, feeling oddly formal in the presence of this impressive woman. Commander Chen lingered at the counter, sipping her coffee while the morning rush swirled around us. Seraphina, she repeated thoughtfully. That's a beautiful name. It means burning one or fiery one, doesn't it? I was surprised she knew the meaning. Yes, though I've never really felt particularly fiery. She studied my face with the kind of attention that made me feel like she was seeing something I didn't even know was there. Sometimes the fire just needs the right fuel, she said cryptically. Over the next few weeks, Commander Chen became a regular customer, always ordering the same thing and always taking a few minutes to chat. She told me about her work with the Coast Guard, about rescue operations and maritime safety, about the satisfaction of serving something larger than yourself. Her stories were fascinating, but what struck me most was the sense of purpose that radiated from her, the way she carried herself like someone who knew exactly why she got up every morning. One particularly busy Tuesday, we were short-staffed and I was struggling to keep up with the orders while training a new employee who seemed overwhelmed by everything. A line of impatient customers was forming, and I could feel the familiar anxiety starting to build in my chest. That's when Commander Chen walked in. Instead of joining the line, she came directly to where I was working and quietly said, "What do you need me to do?" For the next 20 minutes, she helped manage the crowd, taking orders and handling payments with the kind of calm efficiency that only comes from years of leadership experience. She didn't ask for recognition or special treatment, she simply saw a problem and stepped in to help solve it. When the rush finally died down and we had a moment to breathe, I tried to thank her, but she waved away my gratitude. "That's what we do," she said simply. "We help each other." It was in that moment that something clicked for me. Watching Commander Chen in action, seeing how naturally she stepped into a leadership role and how her presence alone seemed to bring order to chaos, I realized what I had been missing in my life. I didn't just want to help people in small individual ways, I wanted to serve something bigger, to be part of an organization that made a real difference in the world. "Commander Chen," I said, my heart pounding with sudden possibility, "what would someone like me need to join the Coast Guard?" She looked at me with surprise, then something that might have been pride. "Someone like you, Seraphina, from what I've observed, you have exactly the qualities we look for. Dedication, compassion, attention to detail, and the ability to stay calm under pressure. The question isn't what you need to do, it's whether you're ready to discover what you're truly capable of." That conversation changed everything. Commander Chen gave me information about Coast Guard recruitment, told me about the different career paths available, and painted a picture of service that spoke to something deep in my soul. For the first time in years, I felt genuine excitement about my future. The application process was rigorous and demanding, requiring physical fitness tests, background checks, psychological evaluations, and countless forms and interviews. There were moments when I doubted myself, when the voice in my head whispered that I wasn't good enough, that I would just embarrass myself and prove everyone right about my lack of direction and purpose. But Commander Chen had given me her personal number and told me to call if I ever needed encouragement. During my darkest moments of self-doubt, I would remember her words about recognizing qualities in me that I couldn't see myself, and I would find the strength to keep going. The physical training was particularly challenging. I had never been athletic, and the fitness requirements seemed impossibly demanding. I started running every morning before work, doing push-ups and sit-ups in my tiny apartment, swimming laps at the local community center. My body ached constantly, and there were days when I wanted to quit, but something deeper than physical discomfort was driving me forward. I didn't tell my family about my decision to apply to the Coast Guard. I couldn't bear the thought of facing their skepticism or having another public failure to add to my collection. Instead, I threw myself into the preparation process with a determination that surprised even me. Months passed, and I found myself changing in ways that had nothing to do with the physical training. I was sleeping better, standing straighter, speaking with more confidence. The barista job that had once felt like a dead end now felt like training ground for customer service skills that would serve me well in any future career. When the acceptance letter arrived, I stared at it for a full 10 minutes before opening it, afraid of what I might find inside. The thick envelope was encouraging. Rejection letters were usually thin, but I had learned not to trust hope too readily. "Congratulations, future Petty Officer Castellanos," the letter began, and I had to read it 3 times before the words truly sank in. I had been accepted for basic training at the Coast Guard Academy. Me, Seraphina Castellanos, the family disappointment, the woman with nothing to show for her life. I called Commander Chen immediately, my voice shaking with excitement and disbelief. "I knew you could do it," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "You're going to make an excellent Coast Guardsman. But Serena, this is just the beginning. The real work starts now." She was right, of course. Basic training was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The physical challenges were intense, but the mental and emotional demands were even greater. We were broken down and built back up, taught to work as a team, to follow orders without question, to push beyond what we thought were our limits. There were moments when I wanted to quit, when the drill instructors seemed determined to find every weakness and exploit it, when homesickness and self-doubt threatened to overwhelm me. But I had something now that I had never had before, a clear sense of purpose. Every day of training was bringing me closer to becoming someone who could make a real difference in the world. My bunkmate, a tough young woman from Texas named Rodriguez, became my closest friend during those grueling weeks. She had grown up in a military family and seemed to adapt to the regimentation naturally, while I struggled with everything, from making my bunk to marching in formation. But she never made me feel inadequate. Instead, she helped me improve, staying up late to practice drills and offering encouragement when I felt like giving up. "You know what I like about you, Castellanos?" she said one night as we polished our boots before lights out. "You don't quit. Some people here are naturally good at this stuff, but you work harder than anyone else to get better. That means something." Her words meant more to me than she could have known. For the first time in my adult life, someone was praising my effort and determination rather than pointing out my failures. As the weeks of basic training passed, I could feel myself becoming stronger, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. The woman who had cowered in embarrassment at her sister's baby shower was being replaced by someone who could rappel down cliff faces, navigate by compass and stars, and work effectively as part of a team under high-stress conditions. The transformation wasn't just internal. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone different, confident, capable, proud of the uniform I wore and what it represented. My posture was straighter, my voice was stronger, and my eyes held a determination that hadn't been there before. Near the end of basic training, we had a graduation ceremony where family members were invited to attend. I had sent information to my parents and Elena, but I wasn't sure if anyone would make the trip. The ceremony was important to me, but I had learned not to depend on external validation for my sense of accomplishment. The night before graduation, as I was preparing my dress uniform and making sure every detail was perfect, our commanding officer made an announcement that caught everyone by surprise. "Tomorrow, you will officially become Coast Guardsmen," he said, his voice carrying across the barracks. "You have earned the right to wear the uniform and serve your country. But I want you to remember something as you move forward in your careers. The Coast Guard motto is Semper Paratus, always ready. Being always ready doesn't just mean being prepared for missions and emergencies. It means being ready to rise above your past, ready to exceed expectations, ready to become more than anyone thought possible." Those words resonated deeply with me as I lay in my bunk that final night of basic training. I thought about the woman I had been just months earlier, picking up broken glass at Elena's baby shower while family members questioned my worth. That woman felt like a stranger to me now, someone from another lifetime. The morning of graduation dawned clear and bright, with a crisp autumn air that made everything feel sharp and clean. As we assembled in formation, wearing our dress uniforms with pride, I spotted familiar faces in the crowd of family members who had come to celebrate with us. My parents were there, looking slightly overwhelmed by the military pomp and ceremony. Elena was there too, her pregnancy now quite visible, holding David's hand as they searched the rows of graduating recruits for my face. But what surprised me most was seeing Commander Chen in the audience, wearing her own dress uniform and smiling with what looked like maternal pride. The ceremony was formal and moving, with speeches about service and sacrifice, about the proud tradition we were joining, about the responsibilities we were accepting as guardians of our nation's waters. When my name was called and I stepped forward to receive my certificate of completion, I felt a surge of emotion that caught me completely off guard. This wasn't just a piece of paper, it was proof that I had completed something difficult and meaningful, that I had pushed through my limitations and emerged stronger on the other side. For the first time in my adult life, I had something to be truly proud of, something that no one could diminish or take away from me. After the ceremony, as families reunited with their newly graduated Coast Guardsmen, I was surrounded by my parents and Elena, who seemed genuinely amazed by the transformation they witnessed in me. "Sarah, you look so different," Elena said, her eyes bright with tears. "You look so strong and confident. I'm so proud of you." My mother, who had always worried about my lack of direction, kept touching my uniform as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. "I can't believe this is my daughter," she said, her voice full of wonder. "You've become someone completely different." But Commander Chen, who had watched my journey from the beginning, offered a different perspective. "She hasn't become someone different," she said as she approached our little group. "She's become who she was always meant to be. The potential was always there. She just needed the right opportunity to discover it." The words hit me with unexpected force, and I realized she was right. The confidence, the determination, the sense of purpose, these weren't new qualities that had been imposed on me during training. They were parts of myself that had been dormant, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Standing there in my Coast Guard uniform, surrounded by family members who were seeing me with new eyes, I thought about the question Isabella had asked at the baby shower. What do you have to show for your life? The answer was still evolving, but for the first time, I had the beginning of a response that made me proud. I had discovered who I was meant to be, and I was just getting started. My first assignment after graduation took me to Station Cape May in New Jersey, where I would spend the next 2 years learning the practical applications of everything I had studied during basic training. The transition from the structured environment of the academy to real-world operations was both exciting and terrifying. Suddenly, the theoretical scenarios we had practiced became actual emergencies with real people whose lives hung in the balance. The station was a bustling hub of activity, with boats coming and going at all hours, rescue helicopters taking off for emergency calls, and seasoned Coast Guardsmen moving with the kind of purposeful efficiency that comes from years of experience. As one of the newest members of the team, I was eager to prove myself, but also acutely aware of how much I still had to learn. My first few weeks were spent shadowing experienced petty officers, learning the rhythms of station life, and gradually taking on more responsibility. The work was demanding and unpredictable. One moment we might be conducting routine safety inspections of recreational boats, and the next we could be racing out to sea to assist a vessel in distress. It was during my 3rd month at the station that I experienced my first major rescue operation. A fishing vessel had sent out a Mayday call in the early hours of a foggy November morning, reporting that they were taking on water and their pumps had failed. The seas were rough, with 12-foot swells and winds gusting to 40 knots, making the rescue operation particularly challenging. I was assigned to the response boat crew under the command of Petty Officer First Class Martinez, a veteran with 15 years of experience who had seen every kind of emergency the ocean could throw at them. As we prepared to launch, he pulled me aside with a serious expression. "Castellanos, this is your first real test," he said, his voice cutting through the wind and rain. "Everything you learned in training is going to matter now. Stay focused, follow orders without question, and remember that people's lives depend on us doing our job right." The boat ride out to the distressed vessel was harrowing. The waves towered above us, and spray from the whitecaps soaked through our protective gear within minutes. I had to fight against seasickness and the natural human instinct to retreat from danger, forcing myself to focus on the task ahead. When we reached the fishing boat, the situation was even worse than we had anticipated. The vessel was listing heavily to starboard, sitting dangerously low in the water.
Through the rain and fog, we could see 3 fishermen on deck, wearing life jackets and looking terrified as their boat continued to sink beneath them. The rescue operation required precision timing and flawless teamwork. While Martinez maneuvered our response boat into position despite the challenging sea conditions, I worked with another crew member to prepare the rescue equipment and establish communication with the fishermen. Every movement had to be calculated and deliberate. One mistake could put all of us in mortal danger. "Castellanos, you're going over," Martinez shouted above the storm. "Get those men off that boat now before she goes under completely." My heart hammered against my ribs as I prepared to transfer from our boat to the sinking vessel. This was the moment when all the training, all the preparation, all the self-doubt and determination of the past months would be put to the ultimate test. There was no room for hesitation or fear. 3 lives were depending on my ability to perform. The transfer itself was treacherous, requiring me to leap across several feet of churning water while both boats pitched and rolled unpredictably. I landed hard on the deck of the fishing vessel, immediately feeling how unstable it had become as water continued to pour into the hull. The 3 fishermen were older men, weathered by years of working the sea, but I could see genuine fear in their eyes as their livelihood and potentially their lives slipped away beneath the waves. The oldest of them, who appeared to be the captain, was trying to maintain some semblance of control, but it was clear that the situation had moved beyond anything they could handle alone. "We need to get you off this boat right now," I told them, projecting as much calm authority as I could muster, despite my own racing pulse. What followed was 20 minutes of the most intense physical and mental challenge I had ever experienced. One by one, I helped the fishermen transfer to our rescue boat, timing each movement to coincide with the rise and fall of the waves, ensuring that no one was crushed between the 2 vessels or lost to the churning sea. The last fisherman to be rescued was an elderly man who had been injured when the boat first started taking on water. He couldn't put weight on his left leg, and the transfer required me to essentially carry him across the gap between boats, while both vessels continued to pitch violently in the storm. As I helped lower him onto our rescue boat, I felt a surge of adrenaline and purpose unlike anything I had ever experienced. This was why I had joined the Coast Guard, not for personal glory or family approval, but for moments like this when training and courage could mean the difference between life and death for strangers who were counting on us to bring them home safely.
The fishing vessel went under completely just minutes after we cleared the area, disappearing beneath the gray waters with a finality that made everyone on our boat fall silent for a moment. If we had been even slightly delayed, if any part of the rescue had gone wrong, 3 men would have died in that cold November sea. Back at the station, as we completed the paperwork and debriefed the operation, Petty Officer Martinez pulled me aside again. This time, his expression was different. There was respect in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Outstanding work out there, Castellanos," he said. "You kept your head under pressure and got the job done. That's what being a Coast Guardsman is all about." His words meant everything to me, but even more important was the knowledge that I had discovered something about myself in those crucial moments on the sinking boat. I had found reserves of courage and competence that I never knew existed, and I realized that the woman who had once cowered in embarrassment at family gatherings was gone forever. News of the successful rescue spread through the station quickly, and over the next few days, several senior officers made a point of acknowledging my performance. It wasn't just the recognition that mattered, it was the growing confidence that I could handle whatever challenges the Coast Guard might present. My second year at Station Cape May brought increasingly complex assignments and greater responsibility. I was selected for additional training in maritime law enforcement, which meant learning about drug interdiction, migrant rescue operations, and the complex legal issues surrounding Coast Guard authority in international waters. The law enforcement training was particularly intensive, requiring me to master new skills in boarding procedures, evidence handling, and dealing with potentially hostile suspects. It was a far cry from the coffee shop where I had once worked, requiring split-second decision-making and the ability to project authority in dangerous situations. During one memorable operation, we intercepted a vessel suspected of smuggling drugs along the eastern seaboard. The boarding was conducted in rough seas at night, with tension high because intelligence suggested the smugglers might be armed and desperate to avoid capture. As part of the boarding team, I was responsible for securing the vessel's crew while other team members searched for contraband. The suspects were nervous and unpredictable, speaking in rapid Spanish and clearly agitated by our presence. Drawing on language skills I had developed during my childhood in a bilingual household, I was able to communicate with them and help diffuse what could have become a violent confrontation. We discovered over 200 pounds of cocaine hidden in specially constructed compartments throughout the vessel, representing millions of dollars in street value and potentially countless lives that would be destroyed by addiction. The successful interdiction felt like a victory not just for our team, but for every community that would be protected from those drugs reaching the streets. The operation earned me a commendation from the station commander and recognition from headquarters, but more importantly, it reinforced my growing sense that I had found my calling. The work was demanding and sometimes dangerous, but it was also deeply meaningful in ways that my previous jobs had never been. As my tour at Station Cape May neared its end, I began to consider my options for the next phase of my Coast Guard career. I had proven myself capable in search and rescue operations and law enforcement, but I wanted to take on even greater challenges and responsibility. That opportunity came in the form of an invitation to apply for officer candidate school. The program would require me to return to academic study while continuing to serve, ultimately leading to a commission as an ensign and the chance to take on leadership roles within the Coast Guard. The application process was rigorous, requiring letters of recommendation, academic transcripts, leadership evaluations, and a series of interviews with senior officers. I spent weeks preparing my application materials, working late into the night to craft essays that would convey not just my qualifications, but my passion for service and my vision for my future in the Coast Guard. When Commander Chen, who had remained a mentor and friend throughout my journey, offered to write one of my recommendation letters, I was both honored and nervous. She had been instrumental in starting me on this path, and her opinion carried significant weight within the Coast Guard community. "I've watched you grow from an uncertain young woman serving coffee into a confident, capable Coast Guardsman," she told me during one of our periodic check-in conversations. "You've exceeded every expectation, and I believe you have the potential to be an outstanding officer. The question is whether you're ready for the additional responsibility that comes with leadership." Her faith in me was both inspiring and daunting. The idea of being responsible not just for my own performance, but for leading and developing other Coast Guardsmen represented a level of responsibility I had never imagined for myself just a few years earlier. The months waiting for a response to my officer candidate school application were filled with continued excellence in my duties at the station, but also with growing anticipation about what the future might hold. I had come so far from the woman who had once doubted her own worth, and I was eager to see how much further I could go. When the acceptance letter finally arrived, I felt the same mixture of excitement and disbelief that had accompanied my original Coast Guard acceptance. But this time, there was also a deeper sense of confidence. I knew I belonged in the Coast Guard, and I was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Officer candidate school proved to be even more demanding than basic training had been. The academic requirements were substantial, covering everything from maritime law to organizational psychology, from navigation and seamanship to leadership theory and financial management. We were expected to master complex concepts quickly, while also demonstrating the practical skills and judgment necessary to lead Coast Guard personnel in challenging situations. The leadership training was particularly intense, with scenarios designed to test our ability to make difficult decisions under pressure, manage competing priorities, and inspire confidence in subordinates who might have more experience than we did. We were constantly evaluated and critiqued, pushed to examine our own leadership styles and develop the skills necessary to be effective officers. One exercise that particularly challenged me involved leading a simulated rescue operation with a team of experienced petty officers who were instructed to question my decisions and test my resolve. The scenario involved multiple vessels in distress during a hurricane, requiring me to prioritize resources and make life-and-death decisions with incomplete information. The exercise was designed to be nearly impossible, with constantly changing conditions and new complications arising every few minutes. At several points, I felt overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation and the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. But I drew on everything I had learned about leadership and decision-making, focusing on clear communication, decisive action, and maintaining the confidence of my team even when I wasn't entirely certain about the best course of action.
When the exercise was over and we were debriefing the operation, the instructor offered feedback that surprised me. "Officer Candidate Castellanos," he said, "you made several tactical errors during that exercise, which is completely normal and expected. But what impressed me was that you never lost the confidence of your team. Even when things were going wrong, they continued to trust your leadership and work together effectively. That's the mark of a natural leader." His words resonated deeply because they reflected something I had begun to recognize about myself during the intense months of training. Leadership, I was learning, wasn't about having all the answers or never making mistakes. It was about inspiring confidence, making decisions with the information available, and taking responsibility for the outcomes. As Officer Candidate School progressed, I found myself taking on more informal leadership roles within my class, helping classmates who were struggling with certain subjects and serving as a liaison between students and instructors when issues arose. These experiences reinforced my growing understanding that leadership was as much about service to others as it was about authority and command. The final phase of Officer Candidate School included a comprehensive examination covering all aspects of our training, followed by a practical leadership evaluation where we were required to plan and execute a complex operation involving multiple Coast Guard units.
My assignment was to coordinate a joint training exercise involving ship, air, and shore-based resources, simulating a major search and rescue operation in challenging weather conditions. The planning process took weeks, requiring me to work with personnel from different Coast Guard commands, coordinate schedules and resources, and develop contingency plans for various scenarios. It was the most complex project I had ever undertaken, and there were moments when I wondered if I was in over my head. But as the exercise began to take shape, I felt a familiar surge of confidence and purpose. This was what I had been preparing for throughout my Coast Guard career, the opportunity to take on significant responsibility and lead others in meaningful work. The challenges were substantial, but I had developed the skills and judgment necessary to meet them. The exercise itself was a success, with all units working together seamlessly to achieve the training objectives. More importantly, the feedback from participating personnel was overwhelmingly positive, with several senior officers commenting on the thoroughness of the planning and the effectiveness of the coordination. When graduation day arrived, I stood with my fellow officer candidates in our dress uniforms, preparing to receive our commissions as ensigns in the United States Coast Guard. The ceremony was formal and moving, with speeches about the responsibilities we were accepting and the traditions we were joining as commissioned officers. As I stepped forward to receive my commission, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. Less than 4 years earlier, I had been a directionless woman working in a coffee shop, doubted by my family and uncertain about my own worth. Now, I was being commissioned as an officer in one of the nation's premier maritime services, entrusted with the authority to lead others and the responsibility to uphold the Coast Guard's mission of safety, security, and stewardship. The ceremony concluded with the traditional first salute, where newly commissioned officers are saluted by an enlisted person of their choosing. I had asked Petty Officer Martinez, my first supervisor at Station Cape May, to do the honors. As he rendered his salute with obvious pride, I felt the full weight of the transformation I had undergone. After the ceremony, as family members and friends congratulated the new officers, I was surprised to see Commander Chen in the audience. She approached with a broad smile and her own crisp salute. "Congratulations, Ensign Castellanos," she said. "I knew from the first day we met that you had this potential. You've proven that with enough determination and the right opportunities, anyone can exceed even their own expectations." Her words brought tears to my eyes, not just because of the recognition, but because they reminded me of how far I had traveled from that day in the coffee shop when she had first suggested I consider military service. The path hadn't been easy, but every challenge had contributed to my growth and development. My first assignment as an ensign took me to Coast Guard Sector Delaware Bay, where I would serve as a junior officer responsible for coordinating search and rescue operations across a large area of coastal waters. The position required me to work with multiple Coast Guard units, civilian agencies, and volunteer organizations to ensure rapid response to maritime emergencies.
The work was complex and demanding, requiring me to master new technologies, develop relationships with diverse stakeholders, and make critical decisions that could affect the outcome of life or death situations. But I approached each challenge with the confidence that had been built through years of progressively greater responsibility and achievement. One case that particularly tested my abilities involved a cruise ship with mechanical problems that left it drifting in heavy seas with over 3,000 passengers aboard. The situation required coordinating multiple Coast Guard cutters, commercial tugboats, and aircraft to ensure the safety of everyone on board while the ship's crew worked to restore power and propulsion. The operation lasted 18 hours and involved constant communication with the ship's officers, Coast Guard headquarters, cruise line executives, and multiple government agencies. At several points, we had to evacuate passengers who required medical attention, using helicopters to transfer them to shore-based hospitals in challenging weather conditions. Throughout the crisis, I found myself drawing on every aspect of my Coast Guard training and experience. The technical knowledge from my early training, the practical experience from my years as an enlisted member, the leadership skills developed during officer candidate school, everything came together as I worked to coordinate a complex response involving hundreds of personnel and millions of dollars in resources. When the cruise ship finally reached port safely with all passengers and crew accounted for, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that went beyond personal achievement. We had prevented what could have been a major maritime disaster, and I had played a central role in coordinating the successful response. The operation earned recognition from Coast Guard headquarters and coverage in national media, but what meant most to me were the thank you letters from passengers who had been aboard the ship. Reading their accounts of how the Coast Guard's response had given them confidence during a frightening situation reinforced my understanding of why this work mattered so much. As I settled into my role as an ensign and began to take on increasingly complex responsibilities, I started to think about longer-term career goals and the kind of impact I wanted to have during my time in the Coast Guard. The service offered numerous opportunities for specialization and advancement, from command positions on cutters to staff roles at headquarters to specialized assignments in fields like environmental protection and international cooperation. But regardless of which specific path my career might take, I knew that I had found my calling in service to others and protection of the maritime environment. The uncertain young woman who had once questioned her own worth had been replaced by a confident officer who understood both her capabilities and her responsibilities. Looking back on the journey from that humiliating day at Elena's baby shower to my current position as a Coast Guard officer, I realized that the transformation had been about much more than finding a career or earning respect from my family. It had been about discovering who I was meant to be and having the courage to pursue that vision despite the doubts and obstacles along the way. The Coast Guard had given me the structure and opportunities I needed to develop my potential, but the real work of change had come from within, from the decision to stop accepting other people's limited expectations of me and to start believing in my own capacity for growth and achievement. As I continued to serve and take on greater responsibilities, I looked forward to the challenges that lay ahead, confident in my ability to meet them and eager to continue growing as both an officer and a person. The journey was far from over, but I now had the foundation and confidence necessary to handle whatever the future might bring. 3 years into my service as an ensign, an opportunity arose that would define the next phase of my Coast Guard career. The service was selecting officers for a new international cooperation program, working with maritime agencies from allied nations to combat human trafficking and enhance maritime security in the Caribbean region. The assignment would require advanced language skills, cultural sensitivity, and the ability to build relationships across national boundaries while maintaining operational effectiveness. When my commanding officer approached me about applying for the program, I felt the familiar mixture of excitement and trepidation that had accompanied every major step in my Coast Guard journey. The position would mean leaving the familiar environment of Sector Delaware Bay and taking on responsibilities that would test every skill I had developed during my time in service. The application process was extensive, requiring security clearances, psychological evaluations, and interviews with senior officers from multiple agencies. I spent weeks preparing, studying international maritime law, brushing up on my Spanish, and researching the complex political and social dynamics of the Caribbean region. The interview panel included a rear admiral, representatives from the State Department, and officers from partner nations' maritime services. They posed challenging questions about diplomatic protocol, cross-cultural communication, and my ability to represent the United States Coast Guard in sensitive international situations. One question particularly stood out. Ensign Castellanos, this assignment will require you to work with officials from countries where women may not traditionally hold positions of authority in maritime services. How would you handle situations where your authority might be questioned based on gender? The question touched on something I had encountered occasionally during my Coast Guard service, though less frequently than I might have expected. I drew on my experiences leading diverse teams and working in challenging environment to provide a thoughtful response about earning respect through competence, cultural awareness, and professional conduct. In my experience, competence and professionalism transcend cultural barriers, I replied. While I understand that different societies have varying perspectives on women in leadership roles, I found that demonstrating knowledge, making sound decisions, and treating colleagues with respect typically overcomes initial skepticism. I would approach such situations with patience, cultural sensitivity, and a commitment to proving my capabilities through action rather than argument.
The panel seemed satisfied with my response, and several weeks later, I received notification that I had been selected for the program. The assignment would begin with 6 months of intensive training in Washington, D.C., followed by deployment to a joint task force headquarters in Puerto Rico. The training phase was unlike anything I had experienced during my previous Coast Guard education. We studied international law, diplomatic protocol, intelligence analysis, and advanced Spanish language skills. We learned about the complex networks involved in human trafficking, the economic and social factors that drove migration, and the delicate balance between enforcement and humanitarian assistance. The human trafficking aspect of our mission was particularly sobering. During briefings, we learned about the scope of the problem and the sophisticated criminal organizations that exploited vulnerable people seeking better lives. The statistics were staggering, but what affected me most deeply were the individual stories of survivors who had been rescued by Coast Guard operations. One briefing included a presentation by a social worker who specialized in trafficking victim assistance. She described the trauma experienced by survivors and the long process of recovery and rehabilitation. Her words reminded me why this work mattered beyond the operational success metrics and diplomatic achievements. We were fighting for the lives and dignity of people who had been treated as commodities by ruthless criminals. The language training pushed me to achieve fluency levels far beyond my childhood Spanish. We practiced technical terminology, legal concepts, and the subtle nuances of diplomatic communication. I discovered that I had a natural aptitude for languages, and the instructors encouraged me to consider additional training in Portuguese and French, which would be valuable for operations throughout the Caribbean region. As the training period neared its end, we received our specific assignments within the Joint Task Force. I would serve as a liaison officer, working directly with maritime agencies from partner nations to coordinate operations and share intelligence. The position would require me to split my time between the task force headquarters and field operations throughout the region. My first deployment took me to Colombia, where I worked with their national navy to plan joint operations targeting drug trafficking routes. The Colombian officers were professional and welcoming, though I could sense initial curiosity about having an American woman in a leadership role within the partnership. The breakthrough came during my second week in Bogotá when we were planning a complex operation involving simultaneous raids on suspected trafficking vessels. The Colombian commander, Captain Herrera, had expressed concerns about the timing and coordination of the operation, worried that communication delays might compromise the mission's effectiveness. Drawing on my experience coordinating multi-unit operations during my time at Sector Delaware Bay, I proposed a modified communication protocol that would allow for real-time coordination while maintaining operational security. The suggestion required me to present detailed technical solutions in Spanish to a room full of senior Colombian naval officers. As I outlined the proposal using charts and diagrams, I could feel the atmosphere in the room shift. The officers began asking detailed questions about implementation and offering suggestions for improvement. By the end of the presentation, Captain Herrera was nodding approvingly and asking when we could begin implementing the new protocols. "Teniente Castellanos," he said, using my Spanish rank,
Your proposal demonstrates excellent understanding of operational challenges and practical solutions. I believe this approach will significantly improve our mission effectiveness. The validation felt particularly meaningful because it was based purely on the quality of my ideas and my ability to communicate them effectively in a second language. The operation itself was a resounding success, resulting in the seizure of over 5 tons of cocaine and the arrest of dozen key figures in a major trafficking organization. Over the following months, I rotated through assignments in Jamaica, the Dominican Republic, and the Bahamas, each presenting unique challenges and opportunities for professional growth. The diversity of cultures, languages, and operational environments required constant adaptation and learning. In Jamaica, I worked with the Coast Guard there to develop new training programs for maritime law enforcement. The Jamaican officers brought tremendous local knowledge and experience, while I contributed technical expertise and access to advanced Coast Guard training resources. Together, we created a curriculum that significantly improved their capability to detect and intercept trafficking vessels. The Dominican Republic assignment involved coordinating rescue operations for migrants attempting dangerous sea crossings. The work was emotionally challenging as we encountered overcrowded boats filled with people desperate for better opportunities. Many of the migrants were families with small children, and the conditions they endured during these crossings were heartbreaking. One rescue operation particularly affected me. We had received a distress call from a vessel carrying over 60 migrants, including 15 children under the age of 10. When we reached the boat, it was taking on water, and the passengers were in various states of dehydration and heat exhaustion. The rescue required multiple trips to transfer everyone to our cutter safely. As I helped a young mother and her toddler onto our boat, she grasped my hand and whispered, "Gracias, Angelita." Thank you, little angel. The gratitude in her eyes reminded me that behind all the operational statistics and diplomatic protocols, our work was fundamentally about preserving human life and dignity. Following the rescue, I worked with humanitarian organizations to ensure the migrants receive appropriate medical care and legal assistance. The process gave me deeper insight into the complex factors driving migration and the importance of balancing enforcement responsibilities with humanitarian obligations. As my deployment in the Caribbean region continued, I found myself taking on increasingly complex assignments and serving as a mentor to junior officers joining the task force. The experience of training and developing other Coast Guard personnel added another dimension to my service, requiring me to articulate not just what needed to be done, but why it mattered and how to do it effectively. One of the officers I mentored was Ensign Patricia Santos, a recent graduate from the Coast Guard Academy who had requested assignment to the international program. She reminded me of myself during my early days in the service, eager to prove herself but uncertain about her capabilities in challenging situations. During her first joint operation, Ensign Santos was assigned to lead a boarding team, inspecting a suspicious cargo vessel. The ship's crew was uncooperative and potentially hostile, creating a tense situation that required careful handling. I watched from the command center as she managed the boarding, providing guidance through radio communication when needed. When the inspection uncovered evidence of human trafficking hidden among legitimate cargo, Ensign Santos handled the complex situation with remarkable composure. She coordinated with the ship's captain, documented evidence properly, and ensured the safety of trafficking victims who were discovered in horrific conditions in the vessel's hold. After the operation, as we debriefed the boarding and evidence collection procedures, Ensign Santos expressed doubts about her performance despite the successful outcome. "I felt so uncertain during the boarding," she admitted. "There were moments when I wasn't sure I was making the right decisions, and I was worried about letting the team down." Her words transported me back to my only experiences in the Coast Guard, when every operation felt like a test of my worthiness to wear the uniform. I realized that sharing my own journey might help her develop the confidence she needed to become an effective officer.
"Santos," I said, "every officer experiences those doubts, especially early in their career. The key is to focus on your training, trust your instincts, and remember that competence develops through experience. What matters is that you performed your duties effectively, despite feeling uncertain. That's what separates good officers from great ones." Over the following months, I watched Ensign Santos develop into a confident and capable officer, much as I had done during my own progression through the ranks. The experience of mentoring her reinforced my understanding that leadership in the Coast Guard wasn't just about individual achievement.
It was about developing others and contributing to the service's continued excellence. As my time with the International Task Force drew to a close, I was selected for promotion to lieutenant and offered a choice of assignments for my next tour of duty. The options included a position as executive officer aboard a Coast Guard cutter, a staff role at headquarters in Washington, or command of a small boat station on the West Coast. Each option presented different opportunities for professional growth and service to the Coast Guard mission. The cutter assignment would provide valuable experience in vessel operations and crew leadership. The headquarters position would expose me to policy development and high-level strategic planning. The station command would give me my first opportunity to serve as a commanding officer, with full responsibility for operations and personnel. After careful consideration and consultation with mentors, including Commander Chen, who had remained a trusted advisor throughout my career, I chose the station command. The position would represent the culmination of my journey from an uncertain young woman to a confident leader entrusted with independent command responsibility. The change of command ceremony was held on a crisp spring morning at Station Point Reyes in California. As I stood before the assembled personnel, officially accepting command of the station and responsibility for its mission, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The woman who had once cowered in embarrassment while family members questioned her worth had been replaced by a Coast Guard officer trusted with the lives of her crew and the safety of mariners throughout the region. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy, but each challenge had contributed to my growth as both an officer and a person. In my first address to the station personnel, I spoke about the importance of our mission and my commitment to supporting their professional development while maintaining operational excellence. But I also shared something of my own story, hoping to inspire any crew members who might be struggling with self-doubt or uncertainty about their futures. I didn't always know I was meant to serve in the Coast Guard, I told them. There was a time when I questioned my own worth and doubted my ability to make a meaningful contribution to anything. But this service gave me the opportunity to discover capabilities I didn't know I possessed and to find purpose in protecting others. I hope that each of you will continue to grow and challenge yourselves because you're capable of more than you might realize. The months that followed were filled with the complex responsibilities of command. I oversaw search and rescue operations along one of the most challenging sections of the Pacific Coast, managed a budget and logistics for station operations, conducted personnel evaluations and career counseling, and served as the Coast Guard's representative in community relations throughout the region. One operation that particularly tested my leadership occurred during a severe winter storm that created dangerous conditions along the entire coastline. Multiple vessels were in distress, and our station was responding to more emergency calls than we could handle with available resources. The situation required difficult decisions about resource allocation and risk management. With limited personnel and equipment, I had to prioritize which emergencies represented the greatest threat to life while ensuring that our crews weren't placed in unnecessarily dangerous situations. The operation lasted over 36 hours, during which our crews conducted 7 separate rescues, saving 23 people from life-threatening situations. The success required every person at the station to perform at their absolute best, working together seamlessly despite fatigue and challenging conditions. When the storm finally passed and we had accounted for all vessels and personnel in our area of responsibility, I felt a deep sense of pride in what we had accomplished together. More importantly, I realized that I had developed into the kind of leader I had once admired, someone who could inspire confidence in others while making difficult decisions under pressure. The recognition that followed the storm operations was gratifying, but what meant most to me were the individual conversations with crew members who had exceeded their own expectations during the emergency. Several junior personnel told me that the experience had given them new confidence in their abilities and renewed commitment to Coast Guard service. As I approached the end of my tour at Station Point Reyes, I began considering the next phase of my career. I had proven myself capable of independent command, developed expertise in international cooperation, and demonstrated leadership in challenging operational situations. The Coast Guard offered numerous opportunities for continued growth and service, including advanced education, specialized assignments, and progression to more senior leadership positions.
But regardless of which specific path my career might take, I knew that I had achieved something far more important than professional success. I had discovered who I was meant to be and found the courage to pursue that vision despite initial doubts and obstacles. The transformation from the uncertain woman at Elena's baby shower to a confident Coast Guard commander represented more than career advancement. It was proof that anyone can exceed their own expectations with determination, the right opportunities, and willingness to embrace challenges that initially seem beyond their capabilities. Standing on the deck of my station one evening, watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean and thinking about the journey that had brought me to this point, I felt grateful for every experience that had contributed to my growth. The moments of doubt and failure had been as important as the successes, teaching resilience and humility that made me a better leader and person. I thought about Elena and wondered if she could have imagined during that difficult baby shower that her younger sister would someday command a Coast Guard station. I thought about my family and their changing perception of my life choices as they witnessed my progression through the ranks. But mostly, I thought about the young Coast Guard members serving under my command and the opportunity I had to help them discover their own potential. The cycle of mentorship and development that had been so crucial to my own success would continue as I worked to inspire and guide the next generation of Coast Guard personnel. The radio crackled with a new emergency call, and I felt the familiar surge of purpose that came with Coast Guard service. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to meet them with the confidence and competence that had been built through years of dedicated service and continuous growth. As I prepared to respond to the emergency, I reflected on how far I had traveled from that day when Commander Chen had first suggested I consider military service. The journey had exceeded every expectation I had dared to hold for myself, and I looked forward to continuing to serve with honor and distinction in whatever capacity the Coast Guard might require. The transformation was complete, but the mission continued, and I was exactly where I belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.